Welcome to Darren's Book Nook. I'm Darren.
I'm Sarah.
Where today we're going to unpack Sheri Frank's memoir, The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom.
Okay.
Now, you might remember Sheri as the oldest daughter from that big Mormon family.
Oh, yeah.
The 8 Passengers. They were all over YouTube a while back.
Yeah, the Franks, they seem to have it all right. Millions of subscribers, brand deals, the whole 9 yards.
Right. Yeah. A picture-perfect life on the surface.
But Sheri's book, oh man, it pulls back the curtain.
It does.
And reveals like a much darker story.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Today we're going to explore Sheri's experience growing up in a very strict religious home, thrust into the, the unrelenting glare of social media.
Yeah.
I will trace the path that led to their very public, very messy family breakdown in 2023.
Right.
So Sheri starts her memoir with this incredibly powerful image.
Okay.
She's returning to her childhood home in Springville, Utah, only to find it swarming with police and SWAT teams.
Wow.
Yeah.
So right off the bat,
Wow.
we are shattering this illusion of normalcy that they presented online, right?
Right.
A stark contrast to the carefully curated world of 8 Passengers.
Yeah, and she even takes a picture of the scene to share on social media.
Really?
Yeah, it's as if she's acknowledging the role that online exposure played in her family's downfall.
That's a really insightful observation, yeah. It speaks to this idea that, like, the digital world can both amplify and distort reality.
Right.
And it sets the stage for a memoir that grapples with this complex interplay between family, faith, and the relentless gaze of the internet.
Yeah, it's like she's saying, this public spectacle started online, so it should end here too, which really sets the tone for the whole book.
Interesting.
From there, Sheri takes us back to the very beginning.
Okay.
Her childhood in Springville, Utah, with her parents Ruby and Kevin and her 5 siblings. And she paints a very vivid picture of their strict, conservative Mormon upbringing. Scripture study was paramount, as was this idea of clean living. And there was this unwavering belief in the family unit as the cornerstone of their faith.
Right. Yeah, you get a real sense of how deeply ingrained these values were in their daily life and how they shaped Sheri's worldview from a young age.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just reading it, it's palpable.
And she also talks about her mother Ruby's intense desire for motherhood, even as a young girl.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't just a personal preference.
Right.
Her ambition for a large family, it was deeply intertwined with cultural and religious expectations.
Absolutely.
In the Mormon faith, motherhood is often seen as a woman's highest calling.
Yeah.
A path to spiritual fulfillment.
Exactly. And she was determined to fulfill that role on a grand scale.
Yeah, so it's interesting how Ruby strategically pursued that goal, even attending college specifically to find a husband.
Right. It's like she had this clear vision for her life and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. And that determination really comes through in Sheri's portrayal of her mother.
She even describes Ruby's process of manhunting during college.
Wow.
Highlighting her mother's very deliberate approach to marriage and family.
Interesting.
And it's in stark contrast to her father, Kevin, who seems much more laid back, content to follow Ruby's lead.
Exactly. And that dynamic with Ruby as the driving force and Kevin as the more passive partner becomes a recurring theme throughout the book. It foreshadows the power imbalances that will later come into play.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Sheri also talks about feeling the pressure of being the eldest child, the one responsible for setting a good example for her younger siblings.
Right.
She even mentions this detail about Ruby forcing her to practice piano for hours every day, which felt very much like a control tactic.
That's a great point. It illustrates this underlying need for control that Ruby seemed to have, That piano practice wasn't just about music. It was about instilling discipline and obedience.
Right.
Shaping Sheri into the ideal daughter.
And it makes you wonder if that early emphasis on control played a role in the family's later struggles.
Absolutely. These early dynamics often foreshadow the challenges that emerge later on.
Right.
And speaking of control, it's fascinating how Sheri connects her family's strictness to their dedication to record keeping.
Oh.
Something that's emphasized in the Mormon faith. It's almost like documenting their lives was a way of ensuring they were living righteously.
Like every moment had to be accounted for, judged against this standard of religious perfection.
Exactly. And for Sheri, this manifests in her dedication to journaling.
Interesting.
Those journals become her outlet, a way to process her emotions and make sense of the world around her.
It's true. Those journals provide some of the most revealing insights into Sheri's life.
Oh, yeah.
You see her struggling with typical teenage anxieties.
Right.
Her appearance, the pressure to be perfect for her future husband, but within this very restrictive environment.
It's like you're getting this unfiltered glimpse into her inner world. And those anxieties combined with Ruby's ambition and her sister's success with family vlogging leads to the creation of 8 Passengers in 2015.
And initially, everyone was excited about the channel. Sheri even claims the 3rd subscriber spot.
Wow.
There was this sense of novelty.
Yeah.
This idea that they were sharing their lives with the world.
Right.
But little did they know that this seemingly innocent family project would take on a life of its own.
Right. What started as a fun way to connect with family and friends quickly transformed into something much bigger. And as the channel's popularity exploded, their lives became increasingly centered around content creation.
Every moment was documented. Every meal, every family outing, every sibling squabble.
Wow.
It was like living in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
Their lives on display for millions of strangers. And Sheri makes it clear that she was uncomfortable with this level of exposure, especially as a teenager.
Right. It's understandable that she felt that way. I mean, imagine having your teenage years, a time that's already filled with so much self-consciousness and uncertainty broadcast to the entire world. That constant scrutiny must have been incredibly overwhelming for Sheri.
Oh, absolutely. And that discomfort, that feeling of being trapped, leads to Sheri's first act of rebellion.
Yeah.
She starts sneaking around with a boy named Jake, even though her parents had strict rules against dating.
Right.
It's almost like a classic teenage rebellion story, except the stakes are so much higher because of their online presence.
Right. It wasn't just a private matter between Sheri and her parents. It had the potential to impact their online image, their brand, their entire livelihood.
Right.
And the consequences of her actions were swift and severe.
Oh, yeah.
Ruby finds out, confiscates her phone, and transfers her to a much stricter school, all in an attempt to regain control and preserve their perfect facade.
It really highlights the lengths Ruby was willing to go to maintain that image of the ideal Mormon family.
Yeah.
And for Sheri, it was a turning point.
Yeah.
She realized that her mother's priorities were with the channel, with maintaining this carefully constructed persona.
Right.
Even if it meant sacrificing her daughter's happiness.
Exactly. Created this deep rift in their relationship.
Yeah.
A sense of betrayal that would continue to fester. And it's right around this time that a new figure enters the picture, Jodie Hildebrandt.
Oh, boy.
She's described as a life coach, but her arrival marks a significant shift in the Frank family dynamic.
Sheri is immediately wary of Jodie and her program connections.
Yeah.
Jodie's teachings center around the concept of truth versus distortion, advocating for strict discipline and isolation from anyone who doesn't adhere to their ideology.
Right.
The very rigid black and white worldview that immediately raises red flags for Sheri.
And you see how Ruby and Kevin become increasingly enamored with connections, using its teachings to justify controlling and isolating their children. It's like they found this framework that allowed them to rationalize their already strict parenting style.
It's a perfect example of how seemingly benign self-improvement programs can be twisted and manipulated to serve harmful purposes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's especially troubling when those teachings are applied to children who are particularly vulnerable to this kind of manipulation.
Absolutely. And the situation escalates further when Jodie recommends sending Shari's younger brother Chad to Anasazi, a wilderness therapy program.
Oh, gosh. It's heartbreaking to read about Chad's experience at Anasazi basically being sent away to the desert because he didn't conform to their narrow definition of obedience.
Right.
It really demonstrates the extent to which Ruby and Kevin were willing to go to enforce their control, even if it meant potentially harming their children.
And as Jodie's influence grows, so too does the strangeness of the situation.
Yeah.
The breaking point comes when Jodie actually moves into the Frank household, taking over Sheri's bedroom.
Huh.
It's a bizarre and unsettling development that further illustrates how deeply enmeshed Jodie had become in their lives.
Oh my gosh. So Ruby justifies this by saying that Jodie is under spiritual attack and needs their protection.
Right.
But to Sheri, it's just another example of how her mother's priorities have become completely distorted.
Yeah.
It's like Jodie's worldview has overtaken their family's family, creating this environment of paranoia and fear.
And amidst all this chaos, Sheri is dealing with her own personal trauma.
Right.
She reveals a devastating secret. She was sexually assaulted by an older man she considered a friend and protector.
It's a truly horrifying experience, and you feel the weight of that trauma as she describes her struggle to process what happened.
Yeah.
She tries to confide in her bishop, seeking guidance and support within the church, but the response she receives is inadequate and ultimately unhelpful.
Her experience speaks to a larger issue, the way institutions sometimes fail to adequately address sexual assault, leaving survivors feeling isolated and unsupported.
Right.
And it highlights the power dynamics that can exist within religious communities.
It's a reminder that even within seemingly safe and supportive environments, abuse can still occur, and the path to healing can be incredibly difficult. And it's against this backdrop of family turmoil and personal trauma that Sheri makes the decision to leave for college. It's a chance for her to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home, to reclaim some sense of agency over her own life.
But even though she's physically distanced from her family, she's still very much entangled in their drama. She's trying to process her own trauma, support her siblings, and deal with the fallout of her parents' separation. It's an incredibly heavy burden to carry.
Yeah.
And it ultimately leads to her breaking point.
She discovers that her younger siblings have been left alone for days, while Ruby is with Jodie.
Oh, wow.
And faced with this realization, she makes the difficult decision to contact Child Protective Services, knowing that it will have explosive consequences for her family.
It's a courageous act, and it speaks to the depth of her love for her siblings. She's willing to risk everything to protect them, even if it means severing ties with her own mother.
And that decision sets in motion the chain of events that will lead to Ruby and Jodie's arrest in August of 2023. A neighbor's tip leads authorities to Jodie's house, where the youngest Frank children are found malnourished. And in distress, the details of their condition are truly harrowing, and it's a stark reminder of the abuse that was happening behind closed doors.
The charges against Ruby and Jodie are serious, aggravated child abuse. The family that was once celebrated for their wholesome online persona is now facing scrutiny and condemnation from all sides.
And Sheri is suddenly thrust into a very public and very difficult position.
Right.
She's navigating the legal complexities of the case, advocating for her siblings, and dealing with the overwhelming media attention.
Yeah.
And amidst all of this, she's still grappling with her own trauma, her anger towards her mother, and her feelings of guilt and self-loathing that often accompany sexual assault.
It's a testament to her strength and resilience that she's able to function at all under these circumstances.
Yeah.
And it speaks to her deep love for her siblings that she's so determined to protect them and fight for their well-being.
And during this incredibly challenging time, she finds herself reconnecting with her father, Kevin. He, too, was a victim of Jodie's manipulation, and together they begin the process of rebuilding their family, creating a safe and loving home for their children.
It's a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Their ability to find common ground and put their children's needs first is truly remarkable given the trauma they've all endured.
There's this really poignant moment in the book where Sheri describes finding her parents' wedding rings while packing up her belongings from her childhood home. It's almost symbolic of the broken promises, the shattered illusion of the family they once were.
It's a powerful image, and what's interesting is that she decides to keep those rings not as a memento of her parents' love, but as a reminder of the pain they inflicted, a tangible symbol of the truth she's determined to uphold.
It's a testament to her commitment to holding her mother accountable for her actions. And as she delves deeper into her family's story, she starts to connect the dots, recognizing patterns of behavior that point to a larger issue, narcissism.
She dedicates a significant portion of the book to exploring this concept, drawing on her own experiences and research to shed light on this complex personality disorder. It's not about labeling her mother or excusing her behavior, but about understanding the underlying psychological factors that might have contributed to Ruby's harmful choices.
It's fascinating how she breaks down the characteristics of narcissism and explains how it manifests in relationships, particularly within families.
Yeah.
She even explores the role of social media in amplifying these tendencies, providing a platform for self-promotion and validation seeking, which is incredibly relevant to their story.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to the Franks situation. Their lives were so intertwined with their online personas, and it's interesting to consider how that might have influenced Ruby's behavior.
And for sharing understanding, narcissism becomes a crucial step in her own healing process.
Yeah.
It allows her to make sense of her experiences, to recognize the ways in which she was manipulated and controlled.
It's a powerful realization, and it gives her a new framework for understanding her own trauma. She even talks about fawning as a trauma response, a coping mechanism she developed to navigate her mother's unpredictable behavior by constantly seeking approval and avoiding conflict.
It's a common response for children growing up in abusive or narcissistic households, and her insights provide valuable understanding for anyone who's experienced similar dynamics.
Right.
She's essentially saying, if this resonates with you, you're not alone.
Exactly. It's a way of normalizing those experiences and offering a path towards healing. And throughout the book, Sheri also reflects on the role of the Mormon faith in shaping her family's story, acknowledging both its positive aspects and its potential for harm.
She doesn't completely reject her faith, but she doesn't shy away from criticizing the failings of the institution.
Right.
Especially when she recounts how Derek, her abuser, faced no consequences while she was punished for speaking out.
That contrast really highlights the power dynamics at play and the challenges many survivors face when trying to hold their abusers accountable within religious institutions. Yeah.
It's a reminder that even within faith communities, there can be a disconnect between teachings and actions.
Absolutely. And while unpacking her family's story, there's this one detail that really stood out to me.
Okay.
Ruby claimed that God had spoken to her, predicting that her children would be taken away.
Wow.
It's almost as if she was setting herself up as a martyr.
Right.
Embracing this narrative of persecution.
That's a fascinating observation, and it speaks to the manipulative tactics often employed by narcissists. They twist reality to fit their own narrative, even when faced with overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
It's a powerful example of how easily truth can be distorted, especially when someone is skilled at manipulation. And it's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives we're presented with, and to recognize the potential for manipulation even within our own families and communities. You know, it's incredible how even amidst all this darkness and manipulation, Sheri manages to find these moments of hope and even humor.
Yeah, it really speaks to her resilience and her ability to hold on to those, those glimmers of light, even in the darkest of times.
Absolutely. And she weaves those moments into her narrative in such a skillful way. Remember when she talks about adopting her kitten Muppet?
Oh, yeah.
It's this tiny, chaotic creature that brings a sense of joy and normalcy to her life, a welcome distraction from the weight of her family's situation.
Oh, it's so relatable.
Yeah.
Who hasn't found comfort in a furry friend, especially during tough times. And her descriptions of Muppet's antics are genuinely hilarious. You can almost picture this mischievous kitten wreaking havoc in her apartment, bringing a much-needed dose of lightness to her life.
It's a beautiful reminder that even in the midst of profound pain and turmoil, there are still moments of joy and connection to be found.
Yeah.
And for Sheri, that connection with Muppet represents a turning point. It's a symbol of her own healing process, her ability to find love and create a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos.
And speaking of healing, Sheri's journey of self-discovery is incredibly inspiring.
Well,
she talks about the importance of therapy, setting boundaries, and finding her own voice. It's a process of reclaiming her narrative, refusing to be defined by her family's trauma or the labels others try to impose on her.
writing this memoir was clearly a crucial part of that process. It allowed her to confront her pain, process her experiences, and ultimately find a sense of peace and closure.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling, the way in which sharing our experiences can help us make sense of our lives and connect with others who have faced similar challenges.
It makes you realize that sharing your story can be an act of courage and healing, not just for yourself, but for others who might be going through something similar.
Exactly. And it reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles.
Right.
There's a universality to the human experience, and sharing our stories can help break down the stigma and isolation that often surround trauma and abuse.
And Sheri's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the pitfalls of social media, the allure of fame, the pressure to present a perfect image online, and the blurred lines between public persona and private life.
The Frank story is a prime example of how quickly the tide can turn. How a family seemingly living the American dream can be exposed as deeply flawed and even harmful.
Right.
It raises important questions about our own consumption of online content, about the responsibility we have as viewers to be discerning and critical, to look beyond the carefully crafted facade and recognize the humanity behind the screen.
It makes you wonder, how much do we really know about the people we follow online? Are we complicit in perpetuating a culture that values curated perfection over authenticity?
Those are crucial questions to consider, especially as social media continues to play such a significant role in our lives.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to be more conscious consumers of online content, to question the narratives we're presented with, and to recognize that the people we see online are complex human beings with their own struggles and vulnerabilities, just like us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Sheri Frank's memoir, what are the key takeaways that we can carry with us?
Well, for me, it's a story about the complexities of family dynamics, the enduring bonds that can both sustain and suffocate us. It's a story about the dangers of unchecked authority and the ways in which dogma can be twisted to justify control and abuse.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it's a story about the importance of speaking out against injustice, even when it feels impossible to do so.
And it's a story about hope, about the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Sheri's journey reminds us that healing is possible, that we can break free from the patterns of the past and create a better future for ourselves and those we love.
It makes you think how many other families are out there hiding behind carefully curated online personas, their struggles concealed behind a veil of digital perfection. And what is our responsibility as viewers, as members of a society increasingly shaped by social media, to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives we're presented with, and to support those who are brave enough to speak their truth?
That's a powerful question to ponder, and it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more compassionate, authentic, and discerning online world.
If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep learning.